100 years of experience in educating and creating generations of leaders who go on to play significant roles in agriculture, the environment, life sciences, business and technology. And whereas we celebrate the NSAC and its students' achievements Friday, May 5th, therefore be resolved that all members of this House congratulate the NSAC's class of 2006 for their accomplishments and hard work and wish them luck in their future endeavors. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Waiver is requested. Is agreed. All those in favour say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to read this on behalf of the member from Timberley Prospect. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas many parents and elementary students of the 1,100 homes in Kingswood subdivision are being stripped of their school buses, and that this government does not take serious the unequivocal safety of our students. And whereas these students of Kingswood Elementary will be forced to walk 2.4 kilometers to school up to 4 times a day without proper infrastructure such as sidewalks and crosswalks, and whereas this government is pulling out of the $49,000 a year agreement between the school board and the Department of Education to fund the busing of these students, therefore be it resolved that this government continue the agreement for this service in Kingswood subdivision and areas in similar circumstances until the proper infrastructure is in place. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Pictou West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice, and on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the lobster fishing season opened along the Northumberland Strait on May the 1st, and whereas increasing costs of bait, fuel, insurance, and other operating costs have eaten into the profitability of many of these family enterprises, and whereas the Northumberland Strait Working Group is studying the reasons for recent years of low catches, especially in the western half of the strait, therefore be it resolved that this Nova Scotia Legislature wish our Northumberland Strait lobster fishermen a safe return to port every day and a season of good catches and good prices. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waiver is agreed. All those in favour say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Dartmouth South, Portland Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Ruth Crozier realized her dream of an all-service spa when the Interlude Spa opened in an historic Victorian heritage home at 58 Ochterlony Street, Dartmouth in 1976. And whereas this family business has expanded to become the largest spa in Metro Halifax with 2 locations and 40 staff providing quality services to women and men. And whereas the Interlude Spas is widely recognized for its focus on health and wellness, the quality of its staff and services, and its customer-oriented approach, and therefore be it resolved that the Nova Scotia House of Assembly recognize the 30th anniversary of the Interlude Spas by congratulating Ruth Crozier, son Brent, daughter Ray, daughter-in-law Kim, and all their staff and clients, and thank them for this inspiring success story. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waiver is agreed. All those in favour say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Cole Harbour, Eastern Passage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas more women each year are seeking to start their own business or are entering professional careers, whereas the maternity leave system in Canada does not provide income replacement for self-employed professionals and business owners so they are able to take an appropriate amount of time off to raise their children. Whereas Quebec has recently created a provincial maternity leave income insurance system that will ensure professional women and business owners are able to access maternity leave income replacement for their families after the birth of a child. Therefore, be it resolved that this House encourage the government to consider a made in Nova Scotia solution to ensure maternity leave and the income replacement required are available to self-employed women in our province. And I ask for waiver, Mr. Speaker.
Request for waiver is agreed. All those in favour say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. Orders of the day. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Would you please call government motions?
Government motions.
Speaker, I move that the adjourned reply to the address and reply to the speech on the throne be now resumed. And Mr. Dexter.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, I had the opportunity to offer some brief comments about the throne speech and what it means to Nova Scotians. I highlighted some of our expectations for the future direction of this government. And this morning, I would like to talk for a few minutes about the challenges the people of our province face every day. I note that in yesterday's speech, Mr. Speaker, the government said that too many families are under stress and too many communities are under pressure. The sad reality is that this is true in large part because of the Conservatives' approach to government. Today's families experience stress because the Conservatives forced tuition fees to exceed the national average by more than $2,200, which I will say more about later. Energy costs increased by 35% or more per year, and yet the government has offered no meaningful help with conservation and energy efficiency. Families are forced to wait for treatment and medical procedures because of a shortage of trained professionals. The lack of affordable housing for seniors and Nova Scotians surviving on modest and fixed incomes, and because there is a lack of affordable transportation options available to the people of the province, particularly, Mr. Speaker, in rural areas. These are some of the reasons that our families are under greater stress. And as the speech notes, our communities are under greater pressure. And once again, the Conservatives' approach has been a big part of bringing that additional pressure to bear on these communities. This pressure gets exerted in many ways, such as the constant threat of permanent closure hanging over schools throughout the rural parts of our province, taking away a vital part of the infrastructure needed to build sustainable communities. Through the worsening conditions of rural and secondary roads across the province that make it difficult for the efficient movement of goods and services, and of course, Mr. Speaker, of people. Through the lack of community-based policing in many parts of our province, through the unavailability of medical services, through locally managed community health centers. And Mr. Speaker, I didn't enumerate these challenges or failings on the part of the government simply to be maudlin or to be partisan. As you will know, I have taken great pains to be constructive throughout the life of this minority government. And you will remember that yesterday, in my initial reply to this speech, I spoke of many of the initiatives that have been long championed by our MLAs and by our caucus that were included in this speech as priorities for the current government. But I feel an obligation, Mr. Speaker, to ensure that Nova Scotians understand how it is that this government chooses to act and on which issues it places priority. Which issues it places its priority when it had the ability to act largely unchecked, as it did from 1999 to 2003. I'm sure all members of this House will permit me the latitude to address some of these issues as they arose in the context of the speech yesterday. Mr. Speaker, I am glad to see that the government has decided not to fine graduates who leave this province to find employment, as was, perhaps in jest, suggested by the member for Pictou Centre a few weeks ago. I am also glad to see that this government recognizes that Nova Scotia students are burdened with costs far above the Canadian average. It is, however, largely this government's record that has caused this burden to be so difficult for students and their families to bear by refusing to support our 11 post-secondary institutions properly and by failing to introduce proper debt relief funds for the province. Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker, does not bear up well in comparison with other Canadian provinces when it comes to affordability of post-secondary education. In fact, we are the least affordable jurisdiction in North America in which to pursue a post-secondary education, according to a recent report by the Education Policy Institute. This dubious distinction is something that no Nova Scotian should take pride in, and particularly those on the government benches. Mr. Speaker, I'm glad that the government recognizes that many of our children fall through the cracks in the education system. Cracks caused by years of underfunding and indifference by successive governments. The problem is that this government still does not know how many children fall through the cracks, or indeed why they do so. Children who drop out of school do so after years of unmet needs. To this day, the government has refused to fully implement the SERIC report. You may know, Mr. Speaker, that SERIC stands for the Special Education Implementation Review Committee. The government has preferred to apply the odd Band-Aid to the deep wounds in the system. As my colleague, the member for Timberley Prospect, has stated again and again in the House, children with special needs and their parents are left waiting for assessment and services for years. Additional guidance counseling will not solve the difficulties that begin in early childhood. We need to focus our attention on providing special education services to children from early education onwards. I am particularly disappointed that there is no mention of the worrying high level of suspensions or bullying in our schools. Children who are being bullied can't learn, and children who are suspended regularly can't learn, and this government appears to be happy to let both groups fall through the cracks. As I said yesterday, Mr. Speaker, I am glad that this government is going to implement the NDP policy of making phys ed a mandatory high school credit. I note that the government botched the handling of the school fees issue last September. It will be interesting to see whether or not there will be money put aside for phys ed to help compensate for the loss of the fees. There was no funding made available to schools to replace the fees banned last September. Mr. Speaker, this government purports to support Nova Scotians in their struggle with rising energy costs, but there is no mention of the Keep the Heat program, which was designed, really, Mr. Speaker, it was a program that was designed to actually reject applications from the poorest and most vulnerable sections of society, low-income seniors and people with disabilities, because they didn't consume enough electricity. What this government needs to do is to remove the HST on home heating sources and other essentials of life and give Nova Scotians a real break. And moving one heating system in the province from oil to gas may be an improvement, but it should not constitute the core of the government's green agenda. I note, Mr. Speaker, that the speech did not once mention the Kyoto Protocol. Moving from fossil fuels to renewable energy supply and undertaking a robust initiative to help Nova Scotian families conserve energy is the best way to improve Nova Scotia's dismal environmental record and, of course, Mr. Speaker, also to support working families. Promoting wind energy is a commitment in this government's blueprint, and to date, this government has done very little to support the growing wind energy sector in this province. That is, besides, Mr. Speaker, putting wind turbines in the Come to Life ad campaign.
Only one.
Only one. I should say a wind turbine.
Right.
The government makes no mention of the e-waste legislation it promised 2 years ago. There is no move to increase the environmental stewardship agreements that will reduce landfill and illegal dumping in this province. The government makes hay with its drinking water strategy, and yet it refuses to deliver on the immediate needs of low-income families with the cost of testing their wells.
Shame.
The throne speech speaks about assistance, quotations over the long-term quotations, and the health needs alone of these families dictate that more immediate assistance be offered.
Good point.
This is an issue of particular concern to my colleague from Halifax Atlantic, and I'm sure that she will have more to say on this in the coming days. In addition, the government has taken its eye off the ball with regards to the tar ponds cleanup. And now the federal government isn't sure whether it will commit to its funding of the cleanup. As the member from Cape Breton Nova has said in this House time and time again, the people of Sydney have suffered long enough. This government should make the tar ponds cleanup funding a priority for its new lobbying office in Ottawa.
Oh, you mentioned the date. Oh, June 13th.
Mr. Speaker, this speech identifies the need to create more information technology jobs in Nova Scotia. But, Mr. Speaker, spending money on excessive bonuses to senior civil servants and Crown Corporation executives will not create more IT jobs in Nova Scotia. Only properly funded economic development programs and an end to questionable loans will create IT jobs. When IT jobs are here, our young people will return. They will want to come home because the only reason they left in the first place was to find well-paying jobs to pay off the mounting student debt imposed as a result of the Conservative policy of the last 8 years.
Shane. The member allow a moment for an introduction. Recognize the honourable member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the honourable leader of the opposition for giving me this opportunity to introduce a member in the Speaker's Gallery of the Legislature. Mr. Speaker, I want to introduce to you Mr. Trevor Zink, who is the chair of the District 9 Citizens Association and also the nominated candidate for the New Democratic Party to carry the banner for the party in the upcoming provincial election. And I also want you and the members of this legislature to know that I have not instructed him on decorum of this legislature, what to say or what to do. Also with him, Mr. Speaker, is Alex Dorian, his stepdaughter, and the niece, Lindsay Behringer. And I would ask the House to give them a warm welcome.
Thank you. The Honourable Government House Leader.
I know he's anxiously awaiting the outcome of this session as well, so... Mr. Speaker, I'm going to pick up, as you will recall, I was mentioning the fact that many of the students who will return to Nova Scotia for IT jobs only left in the first place because of the Conservative policy with respect to post-secondary education that burdened them so heavily with debt. You know, Mr. Speaker, I am also amused by the fact that this government saw fit to state that it supports the arts and artists, although I would note that this term appears only once in the text of the speech. The member for Inverness, the former Minister of Tourism and Culture, was of course responsible for doing away with in one day what it took a generation of Nova Scotia artists to build. And I'm talking about the Arts Council that was abolished just after the government took office. This government, Mr. Speaker, is launching an infrastructure strategy to identify priorities in capital investment. The people of Nova Scotia and presumably the Department of Transportation already know the priorities. What we must do is make road priority lists public, Mr. Speaker. This government is going to consult with the people of Nova Scotia in defining a comprehensive resource strategy. I'm afraid, however, that this government will ignore the people it consults, as it has done on so many occasions before. I also find it troubling, Mr. Speaker, that this government makes no mention of offering stabilizing support in our agricultural sector. We know that this government's approach has been to offer short-term, ad hoc assistance programs that in many cases has simply delayed the decision point for farm families who are attempting to consider their future in the industry. Without a long-term plan to provide stability, our agricultural sectors will lurch from crisis to crisis. Our farm families will continue to suffer. And on the matter of inclusion, Mr. Speaker, I will note, as our caucus has done a number of times when it comes to this government's approach to the province, the lack of any meaningful role for Cape Breton envisioned in this speech. Take, for example, the refusal to listen to Cape Bretoners' desire for a moratorium on strip mining, their ongoing concerns about jobs, the failure of this speech to address issues of municipal equalization, issues surrounding the taxation of Nova Scotia power facilities, and the continuing challenges that are faced by the tourism industry. This government's last throne speech performed much the same sort of insult by omission. And Cape Bretoners, while they may have kin in the highest office of the province, will, it appears, continue to be an afterthought in this government's approach to economic and social development. Mr. Speaker, a word on immigration. The successful implementation of the immigration strategy will not happen until the outrageous fees charged by the private company managing this program are abolished. This province should not have passports for sale.
That's right.
And why, Mr. Speaker, has the government not made a commitment to increase funding for English as a second language?
Good question.
Mr. Speaker, if we expect immigrants to be able to settle successfully and build a life in Nova Scotia, we need to provide the appropriate supports to enable them to do so. The family support stream in Nova Scotia is too narrow to help immigrants to apply for family members to join them. This is why so many of our immigrants move on shortly after their arrival here. But there is no mention of implementing a sensible program that will send a message to people from other countries that we do in fact want them to come here and to build a life here. Mr. Speaker, our caucus is prepared to do what we can to move the government forward, to do what we can as legislators to improve the lives of Nova Scotia families. I look forward to seeing how the government addresses these challenges in the days ahead as they present their budget, as we will see how exactly the government intends to accomplish this agenda. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I would move adjournment of the debate.
Thank you. The motion is for adjournment of the debate. Is it agreed? Agreed. It is agreed. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion is carried. I recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Speaker, I move the House to now rise to meet again on Monday at the hour of 7 p.m. The House will sit from 7 until 10, and the order of business following the daily routine will be resumption of the address and reply to the speech from the throne.
Motion is for the House to adjourn until 7 p.m. on Monday. Is it agreed? Agreed. It is agreed. House is adjourned.